Prime Minister Mark Carney unveiled new financial aid for Canadian softwood lumber. It's among the industries hardest hit in President Donald Trump's trade war.
The U.S. is in the process of fundamentally changing all of its trading relationships. In a series of recent agreements, America is in effect charging for access to its economy.
Last month, Trump nearly tripled U.S. duties on Canadian softwood to more than 20%. Carney is responding with more than $1 billion in loans and grants.
Canada is looking to boost trade with its other North American trading partner, Mexico, as both countries try to work out a trade agreement with the volatile United States under President Trump.
A financial lifeline this Tuesday night for Canada's softwood lumber industry in the face of U.S. tariffs.
Canada's softwood lumber industry is one of the cornerstones of its economy.
The forest industry is a pillar of the Canadian economy. It supports 200,000 jobs across the country, contributes more than $20 billion directly to our GDP. It's the economic backbone of nearly 300 rural, Indigenous, and northern communities, many of them right here in British Columbia.
Thousands of jobs are directly tied to this industry, which supports communities across the country.
Now, with no end in sight for the trade war with the Trump administration, Prime Minister Mark Carney says the federal government will grant a series of financial supports to Canada's forestry sector. The move comes as the U.S. ratchets up duties on Canadian softwood lumber.
Additionally, the softwood lumber industry has significant spin-off effects on other sectors, including construction, retail, logistics, and services.
The softwood lumber industry is taking a hit because of significant new duties from the United States. Alberta's biggest softwood lumber market, but BC may be hit the hardest.
Canada's modern, efficient, and environmentally sustainable lumber companies have long been a reliable supplier to both domestic and international markets, including the United States, the dominant importer of Canadian lumber.
For this lumber company in Canada's British Columbia, U.S. tariff hikes are already a reality.
The trade relationship between the United States and Canada has long been marked by cooperation and mutual benefit, especially in sectors like softwood lumber. However, this long-standing partnership has been marred by tensions, particularly in recent years, with former President Donald Trump's administration driving a wedge between the two nations. The softwood lumber sector has become a key battleground, where tariffs and trade policy shifts have disrupted the market, raised prices, and jeopardized housing affordability in the United States.
Canada's softwood lumber industry is grappling with its future after the U.S. announced duties would be raised to just over 34%. Previously, it was just over 14%.
The ripple effect of Trump's policies on this sector is undeniable, with severe consequences for both the Canadian and American economies. However, the trade relationship between Canada and the U.S. over softwood lumber has been fraught with tension for decades. The dispute primarily revolves around the issue of subsidies. U.S. companies argue that Canada's softwood lumber industry benefits from unfair subsidies, allowing them to sell lumber at artificially low prices in the U.S. market, a practice known as dumping. In response, the U.S. government has imposed tariffs on Canadian lumber imports.
One of Carney's key talking points, Neithu, that the vast majority of Canadian businesses aren't hit by tariffs.
These tariffs have varied in size over the years, but the issue has remained a constant point of contention between the two countries. Under the Trump administration, this issue reached new heights. Trump's protectionist trade policies and America First approach aimed to reduce what he saw as unfair trade practices by foreign countries, including Canada. In 2017, Trump imposed a 20% tariff on Canadian softwood lumber, citing the alleged subsidies as the reason for the move. This set the stage for an escalating trade dispute that would continue to impact the softwood lumber market well into 2025. Please help us beat the algorithm. These news stories may not be favorable for YouTube, but with your support, we can reach more people and keep spreading the truth. Subscribe now and stay informed. Your support makes all the difference. Fast forward to 2025, and the situation has only worsened. Trump, having returned to the White House in January 2025, has revived his hardline stance on trade with Canada. His administration launched a national security investigation into the wood supply chain, particularly focusing on imported timber and lumber. The investigation, which Trump framed as a measure to protect U.S. interests, could result in higher anti-dumping tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber later this year. This investigation is part of Trump's broader effort to impose tariffs on Canadian lumber, adding to the already substantial levies. Before the investigation, Canada's softwood lumber exports were already facing significant tariffs. The current anti-dumping and anti-subsidy duties on Canadian lumber stand at 14.5%. However, following Trump's review, the U.S. Department of Commerce announced a preliminary determination to more than double this levy to 34.5%. This would significantly increase the financial burden on Canadian lumber exporters, already grappling with the effects of Trump's tariffs. As a result, the overall tariff on Canadian lumber would reach nearly 40%, a steep increase that would have far-reaching implications for the entire lumber supply chain. These escalating tariffs have already had a profound effect on the softwood lumber market. Lumber prices, which have been steadily rising, hit their highest level in 2.5 years this week. Lumber futures have jumped by more than 14% year-to-date, signaling growing concerns in the market about the impact of the tariffs. For U.S. homebuilders, this has been a significant blow. Higher lumber prices mean higher construction costs, and these increased costs are ultimately passed on to consumers in the form of more expensive homes. Homebuilders in the U.S. have raised alarms about the impact of Trump's policies on housing affordability. The increased cost of lumber threatens to price many American families out of the housing market, particularly in an already strained housing sector. The housing market in the U.S. is facing a number of challenges, and Trump's tariffs have only exacerbated these issues. Housing prices have been rising steadily for years, and with the added burden of higher lumber costs, new homes are becoming even less affordable. The median price of a new home in the U.S. has steadily increased, and many Americans are struggling to afford the rising costs. The combination of high prices and low supply has created a perfect storm for homebuyers. The tariffs imposed by Trump, designed to protect U.S. interests, have instead caused significant harm to American consumers, especially those looking to purchase homes. Trump's tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber are not only harming consumers, but also domestic industries reliant on affordable lumber. Home builders, contractors, and other industries that depend on lumber for construction are facing skyrocketing material costs. The tariffs have created an unstable market where prices are volatile and companies are uncertain about future supply and pricing. This uncertainty is a major impediment to long-term planning and investment in the housing sector, further hampering economic growth. In addition to raising prices, Trump's tariffs have also undermined US-Canada trade relations. The softwood lumber dispute has strained the economic partnership between the two countries, which has traditionally been one of the closest and most mutually beneficial in the world. Canada is the largest supplier of lumber to the US, and this trade relationship has been crucial for both economies. However, the imposition of tariffs has made it more difficult for Canadian companies to do business in the US, creating unnecessary barriers to trade. As Canada continues to face these tariff barriers, the Canadian government has been forced to consider countermeasures. British Columbia Premier David Eby and Prime Minister Mark Carney have both publicly acknowledged that Canada is considering imposing quotas or limits on softwood lumber exports to the US in response to the ongoing trade frictions. While no official export ban has been enacted, the Canadian government has been exploring ways to address the trade dispute. One potential solution could involve managed trade, where both countries agree to certain export limits or quotas that would help ease the tensions and provide a more stable market for both sides. Despite these efforts to find a resolution, the tariffs imposed by Trump remain a significant obstacle to achieving a fair and balanced trade relationship. Trump's policies have not only led to higher prices for US consumers, but have also created unnecessary instability in the lumber market. While his administration has pursued measures to increase domestic logging, this has not solved the underlying problem of the tariffs on Canadian imports. Instead of creating a more secure and affordable lumber supply, Trump's tariffs have caused harm to US consumers, businesses, and industries reliant on affordable lumber. The effects of Trump's policies on the softwood lumber market are not limited to the US and Canada. The global lumber market has been affected by the increased tariffs as well. Higher lumber prices in the US have led to increased demand for Canadian lumber in other parts of the world, creating new opportunities for Canadian exporters. However, this has also led to higher competition for limited supplies, further driving up prices. The global ripple effect of Trump's tariffs has created a volatile and uncertain market for lumber, making it more difficult for both consumers and businesses to plan for the future. Looking ahead, the situation remains unresolved, and the softwood lumber dispute between the US and Canada is likely to continue. Trump's tariffs have only deepened the trade tensions between the two countries, and the long-standing dispute over subsidies and unfair trade practices remains a significant issue. While Canada has proposed potential solutions, such as export quotas or limits, the future of the softwood lumber market is uncertain, with rising prices and increased costs threatening to undermine both the US housing market and the broader economy. Ultimately, Trump's trade policies have left the US with an economic situation that is more fragile and uncertain than ever before. The tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber, intended to protect US interests, have instead harmed American consumers and businesses, raising prices and limiting access to affordable housing. The failure to find a long-term solution to this dispute has caused unnecessary economic instability, and it remains to be seen how both countries will navigate this trade impasse in the years to come.